Day one of the Golden Gauntlet just wrapped up, and there are all sorts of awesome decks to talk about. Let's jump into my favorite decks that I saw do well in day one of the Golden Gauntlet. We're going to start with someone who might be a familiar face to those who are usually on this channel. This is a list played by Fudge to 7-0, a perfect record in day one of the Golden Gauntlet, and this is effectively a mill deck without any of the mill cards in it. And this is something that makes my heart feel so warm, because Fudge is an incredible player who is often held back by his devotion to the mill archetype. And now that he is finally free from trying to mill people, he can actually focus on playing good cards and winning games with good gameplay, and that is what this deck is doing. But more than that, this is a deck that is actually fairly smartly constructed for the metagame as it is right now, which is very split between combo decks that go very tall and mid-range decks that are increasingly focused on blowing up each other's stuff. In a world where everyone is playing mid-range stuff, and you have relevant payoffs for blowing up your opponent's stuff, that can be a really beneficial space for you to be in. Cards like Lady Deathstrike are actively good, blowing up things like Mercury, whereas Killmonger can give you answers to all sorts of one-drops. However, in addition, you have this overarching endgame that this deck brings to bear, and that is the death. There are not nearly so many Mobiuses in this current metagame, and even when there are, you have answers to them in the form of Lady Deathstrike. If both of you are playing a fairly fair mid-range game, but one of you has a 2-12, the person with the 2-12 is usually going to be hugely advantaged. It should go without saying that Luna Snow, which is a sort of Fudge specialty, is actually quite good with death. The ice cube getting destroyed actually does count. Plus, it is multiple things that die under a Killmonger as well. Ramping out into your misery game plan means that you are able to sort of have a lot of potential in your hand, with multiple demons and a death perhaps, while not actually having priority to get blown up by your opponent's Cannonball Mercury shenanigans, whatever they may be. This deck looks to play the mid-range game in a really smart way. And I think what it's trying to do, which is be a mid-range deck that goes over the top of other mid-range decks with vast point output on the final turn of the game, but at the same time does not actually give up anything when it's not doing its nut draw, means that it's in a very good position. When Mill previously was good, it was largely because of this same metagame positioning. A mid-range deck that used Death to go over the top of other mid-range decks. Turns out you don't need the Mill package to do what Mill was good at, which was being a mid-range deck that was slightly bigger and slightly more dangerous than the rest. Joining him at 7-0, played by 785CM, is a deck that I am sure everyone that I am showing this video to will despise with great alacrity. However, that's part of why it's probably pretty good. This is, of course, Thanos Tech, and it's even more annoying than you remember it being, because it's Thanos Tech that also has Mercury Cannonball and Fenris Wolf in it. Good luck with that one. I mean, I'm pretty sure you know what's going on here, right? This is the same Thanos Tech deck as it's always been, except now sometimes they blow up your biggest thing and then revive your biggest thing. It's all the most annoying cards in the game, it's everything you hate to see, and it's the newest, hottest, broken thing as well. You know exactly what this deck is trying to do. It is here to ruin you, and I will say this. It has taken a notable hit in explosiveness. I do not think that is arguable at this point. The hit in explosiveness that this deck took from losing the Time Stone drawing a card, and of course from, if you'll notice, cutting Sam Wilson in your Strange Supreme Mockingbird deck, there are hits being taken to explosiveness here. This is not a deck that will always do what it's trying to do all of the time anymore, but it is a deck that has answers to basically everything that could possibly happen. And I think that's important, because the metagame has honestly been missing a full answer deck. Ella Enjoyer is someone I think many people should remember from way back in the day. Remember when Living Tribunal was actually a good deck for a little bit? That was because of this guy, and what he's managed to do is bring Living Tribunal into what I think anyone would reasonably describe, including him, as an incredibly hostile field. People are playing Negasonic, they're playing Mercury Cannonball, they're playing Red Guardian, they're playing Enchantress. Those are very popular cards in this field. You're seeing a lot of them. He's taken this deck and he's taken it to a 6-1 start, meaning that he is very likely, or at least reasonably favored, because his tiebreakers are also good, to maybe make it into the top 16 with a deck that was on basically nobody's radar. Now, this is definitely a pick that is, in my opinion, and I think likely in his, we talk sometimes, doing well largely due to unfamiliarity. There is a sort of open space in the metagame for combo decks that are not necessarily as predictable as you might think. People know how to play against Mr. Negative, people know how to play against Cerebro. So what this deck is, as predictable as it may seem, is actually able to take sort of subpar lines on the final turns of games and make things awkward as possible. Now, this is still a combo deck that has some very clear vulnerabilities, but it is a deck that people are far less familiar with playing against. I think a lot of the value in this deck comes from Blink, who can just be a card where your opponent has no idea what your chances of getting whatever card you need from Blink are, but you know exactly what's coming out of that Blink a lot of the time, and they may feel like they got unlucky, but then if you dial into it, they were actually like 85% to lose. They just couldn't actually know that. It happens a lot with Blink decks, and it's definitely clear in this one that Blink plays a pretty crucial role. Hella Enjoyer only recently just came back to the game, so this is a very impressive performance from someone who just started playing Marvel Snap again with the advent of Snap Packs. If the other Thanos deck wasn't enough to get people into a frothing rage, perhaps Roram's build of 34-card Monty will be enough to set people rabid. This is, of course, the deck that is doing its best to weaponize RNG in Marvel Snap. Whether there's locations that you can take advantage of with Legion, or something stupid you can do with your extra energy, or something stupid you can do with your Agamotto spells, whatever it is, this is a deck that is heavily invested in your opponents having absolutely no idea what the hell to do about it. This is a deck that could be snapping on literally anything in the game. If you get snapped by this deck, you have no idea why most of the time. Their range is so massive, and in an open decklist field, weaponizing that range can be a very viable thing. I believe when looking through the deck list, there were 5 different versions of 34-card Monty in the top 32, which also speaks to another aspect of this metagame. It's very unfigured out. Decks like this, RSM decks, tend to be much better in the early weeks of metagames before people actually start refining their lists and figuring out what good coherent game plans are. One of the weaknesses that I've noticed from playing this deck is basically anyone who has like a really good coherent game plan, they'll just beat you. You're good for doing like one really stupid thing per game, but if your opponent just like curves into a Wiccan, a lot of the time they're just going to be doing something stronger than what you're doing because they'll have the energy to match you. And so you end up in a weird spot where this is a deck that is very good against random BS, and it is also a deck that is weaponizing random BS. But like against something like Surtur, for example, you just look at that deck and you're like, oh yeah, I actually just lose to a bunch of 410s. Most of the time I just can't beat that. And I think that's a really remarkable space for this deck to exist in. It's dangerous, but it's also fragile. It's honestly a bit of a glass cannon. A bunch of people played variations of this. I think it was like 3 or 4 people at 6-1, 3 more at 5-2. Most of them were like within one card. There was a really cool one that I saw that was mixing in a super giant package. I don't really feel like I can take credit for that one at all, but I do want to point out that this deck is still pretty much doing well. Obviously, it's the deck I hit rank 1 with. There's definitely some pedigree here, but what I find the most interesting is that I think this deck might have just been like an early metagame product. I think it's entirely possible that like it was really good because I was like the first person abusing this cannonball stuff, but as time goes on, people are going to figure out better and more efficient ways to abuse this cannonball stuff, and maybe that means that this deck gets pushed out by those more efficient ways. This is definitely a brute force attempt at doing the cannonball thing. It's not something where it's like, let's go into the lab and cook up an intricate thing. It's do as much brute force cannonballing as we possibly can, and I think there is something to the idea that maybe there's a more refined version of the cannonball combo list out there somewhere. For example, 2 people are on 6-1 fusing the Cannonball combo into their Elsa Bloodstone Good Stuff decks, and this seems really potent to me because it allows them to stop being so heavily reliant on things like Shang-Chi, and so you have an offensive card in the form of Cannonball that can also be a defensive card that removes things that are otherwise too big for you to beat. I think that's a really cool direction to go with a deck like this, because Previously, you're relying on Shang-Chi and it's not very good, but Cannonball when you don't have Mercury is vastly better than Shang-Chi when you don't have any targets. And so I think this is a genuinely smart direction to take the list. It's a very interesting thing to do. And yes, I do feel the metagame is starting to be not necessarily defined by Cannonball Mercury, but if this was a race, it would be taking the early lead. And so finding the best Cannonball Mercury deck is definitely something that sticks out to me. I do wonder about the cutting of the Fenris Wolf package. Again, I talked about it. It was a very brute force attempt at just getting the most value out of Cannonball Mercury as possible. It might just be better to just be playing a bunch of good cards like this. Very open to that idea. I believe I showed this list in my Merlin deck lists discussion, and the guy I got it from has now gone 6-1 in the first day of the Golden Gauntlet. That is Honifer. It's a very solid deck, just doing very solid deck things. Merlin's best synergy, of course, with Werewolf by Night, and then you have a bunch of other spells that just do something stupid, using the Agamotto, or using the... They need to stop releasing cards with A names that cost 5 and do stuff like this. I mix up Arishem and Eliath all the time. Now I'm mixing up Annihilus and Agamotto. They need to stop it. Anyway, Annihilus Agamotto is definitely like a very solid direction to take this. Like, I do enjoy the fact that you have multiple ways to get rid of the Void now, whether that be through using the Images of Icon or either of the 2 Merlin spells that can answer it, but also sending that over. Obviously, your plan A, very cool. One of the things you see with Annihilus a lot is, of course, the Hood. The Hood is phenomenal, again, with both of those spells. All of this makes sense to me as a deck building conceit. It just, I do worry about how it matches up into the Cannonball Mercury stuff. And from my understanding, that is a worry that is shared by Honifer, which is the person who made the deck, right? Where it's like, that matchup is a little bit awkward just because they are a mid-range deck that has that sort of catch-all slam the door ability where you are trying to play a little bit more fair. So in those matchups, things can get a little bit awk. Similar concept here, another player who used to play a ton but hasn't played much recently, Get Wrecked, one of my oldest moderators actually, came back to the game again with snap packs, much like Hella Enjoyer, and is now sitting at 6-1, going into day 2 of the Golden Gauntlet, playing this list, which is also, I believe, what Lambie Series is playing at 5-2, and I believe probably some others, but I know it from these 2 players. Now, Get Wrecked is a good player to begin with, but I also think that this is a very solid, powerful, mid-rangey deck that has the ability to really mess people up in ways they don't necessarily expect. I like what it's trying to do. I believe Lambie ended up going with an Enchantress in addition, which is also very, very solid. I want to say it was for the Killmonger. It might have been for the Red Guardian. Either way, this is a solid, powerful list that is doing solid, powerful things. Again, the worry that I have for most mid-range decks that aren't Cannonball Mercury decks is how do you beat the Cannonball Mercury Fenris Wolf thing? Because when your opponent blows up your biggest thing and then revives it, it just seems very hard to actually win those games. And I think a lot of that is just, you have to deal with it because that's what battle mode means. They are not going to have it all the time. You need to capitalize when they don't have it. You need to capitalize when they're not wickening. And I think that that is sort of a really powerful dynamic to try to recognize here, where it's like, yeah, I do think probably a lot of the Cannonball mid-rangey decks are favored into these non-Cannonball mid-rangey decks, but because of battle mode, you can let player skill win out, and I think that's a really cool thing to see. One of the only players on this list that I am not familiar with is this player who I have to look at the screen to actually make sure I get the numbers right. This is Thomas6448 at 6-1 with Cerebro 2. One thing I really wanted to commend this person on is not playing Blue Marvel in their Cerebro 2 deck. To my mind, Blue Marvel is an absolute loser in the deck. I don't care what the stats say. I don't care what anything says. I will die on this hill. Blue Marvel does nothing in this deck but lose you games. The reason why: you cannot protect a Blue Marvel with a Goose. If they Enchantress your Blue Marvel, it has 3 power. Everything else has 2. It takes both Cerebro buffs. You instantly lose the game. It is a card you cannot protect, and it is a card that you have to run out there on 5 if you want to get value out of it a lot of the time, because it's very bad to play Blue Marvel and basically nothing else on 6. This is a card that is a neon, blinding, flashing sign saying, Enchantress me and I will lose the game. And I think that is a very bad thing to have in your Cerebro 2 decks. I do not think it's a coincidence that the best performing Cerebro 2 deck in the tournament is this one without a blue Marvel in it. 121 Eggy, the Marvel Snap prodigy over in Taiwan, I believe, is a phenomenal player who is often making great deck selection choices, which is why it was so shocking to me to see him bringing Cerebro. However, he has managed to get into day 2 with it. Everyone at 5-2 gets into day 2, which means he is technically still alive with Cerebro 3. I just wanted to highlight that Cerebro 2 and Cerebro 3 both making it to day 2. I think that is a really cool thing, and obviously I will be rooting for both of them. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I will be commentating on day 2 of the Golden Gauntlet tomorrow, which is tomorrow from the day this was uploaded, so that'll be Sunday. Please do check it out. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. I can't wait to share this tournament with you. Have a wonderful day.